All right, guys, we are going to work on our watercolor techniques. As I draw this out, I wanted to go over a couple of things about watercolor. Watercolor is mostly going to be water and very little pigment. If we use too much pigment, it actually will be a problem because it makes the surface of our paper sticky. So whenever we are working with watercolor, we want to make sure that we have just a little bit of pigment in there. And we actually are going to build our layers just like we've done in the past when we did color pencil and ebony pencil. So we're doing all of these techniques over here on one side of our paper, and the other half of the paper will end up being a place for us to continue to work on some of these techniques and test out mixed color mixtures, mark making, which we'll do tomorrow, and just learning, getting really familiar with our brush, because this paint is different than our tempera paint. It doesn't go down the same way, and it is, because of the water use of the water, it's a much looser and almost unpredictable way of working. But again, once we start learning how to control the water on our paper, we'll actually be able to really control the medium really well. So make sure you have your water with you, and our pigment in our paint well is reactivated with water. So we'll take that brush then in your set, which is the medium sized brush, and just add a little bit of water into each of your paint wells. You get to use whatever colors you want. I'll use some colors on there, but you don't have to use the same colors. You can pick whatever colors you want to do these techniques. I would say that yellow is hard to see the techniques, and black just gets really dark and sometimes gets overwhelming to work with. So I would stick with the colors or the brown, and maybe stay away from yellow for right now. And of course, you will still be able to use it later on. So we're going to do the flat wash first, which I just am getting clean water onto my brush, and I'm going to fill in the entire box. And when you're creating a flat wash, this is great for covering large spaces, just blocking in a layer of color. Since I told you we're going to build up a layer, you might start with a flat wash just to get a general color down. And because we painted the entire surface with water already, when I start putting that pigment down, it's already going to start pooling all over that paper, and that surface where I've put the water. Anywhere I place the water, it's going to pull that pigment. And I will use my brush to make sure that I've evenly applied it. A flat wash is really best applied with a flat brush, and we're using a round brush, so sometimes our techniques have to shift based on what type of brush. And you can see it has a nice even value. The next one that we're going to learn is lifting, and I'm just going to actually just I put a little water in my purple, and I'm just going to grab some pigment and get a little more water on my brush and fill in that box. I picked purple because it actually is a really good one for us to see the lifting technique. And lifting is great if you suddenly, all of a sudden, you're like, oh, crud, I put too much water down on the surface and I need to pick it up real fast. Of course, you can use a paper towel, but I like to rinse off my brush and then I squeeze out any of the extra water, and I just use my brush as a sponge. And you can see what I'm actually doing is lifting the water. When I lift the water, it lifts the pigment as well because the pigment's in the water. And so you can see it is actually another good way to create maybe lighter values in certain areas. So if you wanted to be selective, and maybe you're painting a flower petal and you want the edges to be slightly lighter, you might use a little bit of a lifting technique with your brush to just lift up a line of paint along the edge, a little bit of that water to make it lighter. We're going to do the hard edge next, and hard edge just implies to how the edge of the two paint colors are going to meet. You will want to see the designs that you draw out. We have to kind of alternate our spaces that we're painting in. Water is the is how that pigment is going to travel. So as long as the paper is wet, then that means that the water and the pigment are going to travel all throughout that space. And so if I wanted to, like, I'm going to create stripes. And then what we're going to do is we're going to let it dry overnight. And we'll come back and we'll paint another color in between. In order for me to really get that nice hard edge, just that box shape, I have to let it dry. Even at the end of this exercise today, it might seem like it's a little bit more dry, but oftentimes it's just in a damp state. Even when the paper is damp, it can bleed into each other, and we'll learn about bleeding colors in a little bit. But that just basically meaning that one of the colors is going to go into the other, and you won't have that crisp edge anymore. Okay, so when we start painting like our composition later, if you want one color in one space and right next to it you want another color, you're going to have to let it dry before you get there. Graded wash is great for creating when we want to shade, we want to create that light to dark or dark to light. And I just grabbed a little bit of water and my pigment to start off with. And what I do is I'm just going to get a little more water on there and I'm going to paint just right outside of the box I just painted. What I'm doing is I'm adding more and more water onto the surface, and it's thinning out the intensity of the pigment. So progressively it's getting, you can see it's kind of getting lighter and lighter and lighter, and actually I start rinsing off my brush completely and just getting all of that water off, and where it's just really getting really light. Now, because of the type of paper that we have, we do sometimes have to go back a little bit, and you saw that little bit of a hard edge, just kind of touch it with the end of my brush, and it'll kind of move it along so that you can see that dark to light. I'm going to just, on the other side of the box, we're going to do another graded wash. This one does take practice. And I like to practice with all the colors because I do feel that some of the colors work a little bit differently, or the way the intensity of them as they shift from dark to light. But with this one in particular, we're adding lots of water onto the page. So sometimes as I'm doing a graded wash, I actually have to go back and lift from the paper to just get some of the extra water off the page because it's becoming too hard to control. And so I'm just kind of breaking up that red so you see it slowly pulling in that direction, and it's getting lighter and lighter. And I intentionally left a gap between the orange and the red, but I'm just going to go ahead and close that, and what it will do is actually lightly bleed into each other, so it starts to create a slight blend from the orange into the red. And there I am doing my lifting technique to take some of the extra water. Now, the extra water is not a big deal, but what will happen is you can actually see there's a little bit of block of red. Wherever you see the water, it's going to puddle there and it'll dry like that. So sometimes I like to lift it because I don't want it to dry unevenly. Okay, so we're going to be blending colors, and this is a great time to talk about bleeding. So I'm just going to blend one color into the other, and I'm just going to go create like a prism. Whenever I do that, I might start with one color, and then I put the other color right next to it, and then I gradually use my brush to pull one color into the other. Now, with bleeding, a lot of times you don't have to do a lot. You can just simply, when the two colors meet, they'll immediately start to swirl together and bleed into each other. And actually, you'll see that as we get in further into this, you'll see it on mine, and you'll probably see it on yours. That water will just start pulling the other pigment in to the rest of it, and just swirl around. And again, since we are working with lots of water, so this is usually a time when it starts to get kind of crazy because there's a lot of water on the surface, and it's pulling my pigment all over the place. It gets kind of messy, but in this case, I'm not really concerned about that, and if it's getting messy on yours, I just really want you to start to see how that works. Okay, because like a lot of our techniques with watercolor is just trying out these techniques. These might be really new to you, and you might have worked with watercolor before, but maybe not in such a controlled fashion. So what we want to do is just really learn how to control it. So you can kind of see how that orange is bleeding over the yellow and into the green. And if I even went back into that prism and started to drop more yellow into it, it would start bleeding in those spaces, and just it's kind of our way of mixing colors on the surface. It can create some really cool effects. So I'm going to just use a little bit of a lifting technique just to take some of that extra water off so it's not puddling up too much. Okay, and we're going to move up towards the top. I've kind of moved all over this page. I probably would make a lot of sense to go from the top to the bottom, but I've jumped all around, so it's okay. Really, the value scale is just a place for us to just, again, isolate our values and getting a better idea of grabbing pigment. So when I'm starting on the lighter side, I want just very little pigment on my brush and a lot of water to get those light values. Then I just add more pigment into my square and then add my water on there. So it's just like when we've done value scales before, you can definitely see that shift from light to dark. Now that's why we did our double line in between each box, because I really want us to have really kind of a flat value in each of these boxes, because I want you to really kind of learn how to control how you can achieve different values with the watercolor. Notice that it's not super saturated. Now, if I wanted to make it super saturated, I probably would just go ahead and let that dry and add more layers. But if I added more pigment into that square and with less water, it's potentially could make it like really sticky, because if the pigment is concentrated and it gets to be too much. Add a little water into my red, and I knew that I added a lot of, I'm sorry, not water, black into the color, so it was pretty dark. So I went ahead and added it over to the far side of my my value scale, and since I'm dealing with a very little amount of paint, I actually did kind of the opposite of what we just did or earlier when we did tempera, where I was like, add your dark into your light value. I can kind of be a little bit going both ways with the watercolor, just because I'm using a whole lot less pigment, and I'm using I can mix my colors a little faster. And you can see I use the lid of my palette as my mixing. And you see the ones that are they're already dry. I can just add water and I can reuse them. And that is all we are going to do today.